Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soul Seekers podcast, where we believe that hunting has the power to transform lives through primal adventure, as we share our mission of mentorship is conservation. To learn more about everything we do, check out our show on Carbon TV or go to soulseekersnation.com. Freedom on, everybody, and stay soulful. Do you want to become a better shooter, reduce flinch, protect your ears, and just overall enjoy shooting your gun that much more? Then there's no better way to do that than by adding a suppressor to the end of your barrel. Be sure to check out Huxwrx Safety Co, as they are a leader in the suppressor world with their OSS Flow-Through Technology, virtually eliminating blowback and toxic gas that can affect weapon system performance and shooter health. To find out more about Huxwrx, go to huxwrx.com. That's huxwrx.com, and go get yourself a suppressor for your upcoming hunts. This podcast is also proudly brought to you by OnX Hunt. When I first got into hunting, I kept hearing all about public land and different access and how to find different locations to hunt. I was like, well, how are people even identifying all this stuff? Well, sure enough, I came across the number one hunting GPS app, and that is OnX Hunt. If you guys want to get better at hunting and go deeper into your scouting, OnX Hunt is the number one GPS app for that. Join the millions of hunters who trust OnX Hunt to find more game, discover new access, and hunt smarter. It was a game changer for me, and I know it's going to be a game changer for you if you've never used it. If you have used it, you know the power that it holds. Guys, I really hope you enjoy this episode. If you want to know more about OnX, go to onxmaps.com/hunt. And check out their app. Be blessed, freedom on, and stay soulful. If you're in the market for optics, I want you to go check out blackdiamondoptics.com. Black Diamond Optics offers world-class sporting and tactical optics, including thermals, all at wholesale pricing, direct to consumer. They are going to be partnering up with us for 2023, and I want to start pointing you over towards their direction. Check out Black Diamond Optics. If you've got any questions about it, shoot us a message. Love to hear from you. Be blessed, everybody. All right, guys, if you're looking for a better way to stay hydrated this coming hunting season and on all your adventures in the future, go check out hardsidehydration.com. Their swig rig is awesome, an absolute game changer when it comes to staying hydrated. I get tired of playing around with any water bladders in my bag and having to remove things to get to them and the chance of them puncturing and all that. So what Hardside did, take Nalgene's, got multiple sizes, and you're attaching your hose straight to that. Keep it on the outside of your pack, a lot easier to use. They also have a lot of other cool things. Go check out hardsidehydration.com. Use the code SOULSEEKERS10. That's all one word. Save yourself 10% at checkout. Hope you guys enjoy this podcast. Be blessed. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Soul Seekers podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack, and today I am joined by a fellow podcast host and host of the TV show Texas Dirt on Carbon TV. The podcast is Fall Obsession Podcast, found wherever you listen to your podcast. We got Sam Thrash, the host of the show and podcast. We're going to be talking all about his adventure of going west. We've had Sam on this fall. We talked all about whitetail hunting, and he's lives in the same county as me. Not too far away. We become buddies, and so he went and took his bow and headed off west to Colorado to do a mule deer hunt. And we're going to be talking all about those adventures here. So, brother Sam, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me back on. It's always a fun time coming on the Soul Seekers show. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for all the people who are listening to this podcast, this is also Instagram Live. So if we ever have some questions that are popping in the comment section, we'll be answering those throughout the night. So as you're hopping on the live, feel free to ask whatever, and we'll be sure to do our best to answer those. So, Sammy, how's your fall been, man?
Man, it's been busy. As you know from also hunting down here in Texas this year, October was pretty warm, and I honestly didn't hunt as much in the month of October as I thought I was going to down here. But it seemed like when November hit, everything just ramped up, and we've been going ever since. Hunting a bunch in Texas, still, trying to work, because that's a thing apparently. You still got to work. So
Right.
trying to work around that. And then right after Thanksgiving, I had this trip out to Colorado for 8 days, and just back hammering it out at home and at work and everything. And I'm actually tomorrow I'm leaving for our third annual Fall Obsession Veterans Hunt. So we're going from one thing to another. So
Sweet. Talk about that for a second before we get into your story. So for the last couple of years, Fall Obsession has been putting together a veteran hunt, and what do you do with it?
so it wouldn't be possible without one of our staff members at Fall Obsession and the hunt host himself. His name's Waylon Langford, a local Texas guy here who donates the hunt basically every year. He's done that for the past 2 seasons. We've been very fortunate to take a couple of awesome individuals hunting the last couple of years that wouldn't have that kind of opportunity otherwise. And so, for the third consecutive year, Waylon has been gracious enough to donate that hunt again for the Fall Obsession crew to host. So Waylon will be in camp. I'll be in camp as a producer, filming and capturing the experience and all that kind of stuff. And we hope to give back to a veteran and hopefully put them on a nice Texas whitetail and have a weekend. If they kill early, maybe we get on some hogs too. So we'll see.
I love that. I love that. How do you go about selecting your veterans? Because there's a lot of veteran support to get veterans out of field and hunting and all that. So how do you guys go and select your people?
So it's a process. We brand it and call it every year our veteran hunt giveaway, which we are giving away a hunt. But as far as how we select our veteran, it it's a much more in-depth process because we want this hunt to be something of significance. We want this hunt to mean something to the individual that we're taking. So folks can either whenever it's open every October or so, folks can either apply themselves or they can nominate somebody else. Like if you yourself aren't a vet, but you know somebody who you think would be a really special person for the hunt,
Hmm.
nominate them. And we ask you about, why would this hunt be significant? Tell us about their military experience. We want to know their background and everything coming into it and stuff. And then our administrative team, we take all those applications and nominations and we narrow it down to a select few. And then we send those over to our hunt host, Waylon, and we actually let him make the final selection on who's coming out.
That's
So
awesome. What part of Texas you guys going to be in?
we'll be about 20 miles northwest of Vernon, Texas. So kind of right as you're angling up toward that little curve in the top of Texas where it curves up into the panhandle. We'll be just south of that. So
That's awesome.
it,
And so Texas, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's an awesome place. Not what would strike you as whitetail country, but there are deer packed into those fields and those woods, and it's unbelievable up there. It's an awesome time.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. So, Sam, you just recently got back from Colorado. You decided to head west and in search of filling a. Was this your very first mule deer?
Yes, this was my very first mule deer hunt. Yes.
Man, that's a big deal. And do you refuse to rifle hunt, or where? Like, why did you go west with the bow?
So I'm probably stubborn in this, but uh, several years ago, actually more than that, it's like I guess it's 10 years ago now. I decided to go bow only with my deer hunting, big game hunting endeavors, and I make exceptions for wild hogs down here just because there's so stinking many of them and they're a nuisance, and coyotes, that kind of stuff. But for normal big game hunting, I I went bow only after the 2013 season, and that's because in 2013 I shot what is still today my biggest whitetail to date, um, from a ridge like 150 yards out with a rifle. And don't get me wrong, I was tickled to death, like absolute stud of a buck. But after that, I was like, I want to kill everything with a bow. I was so excited, but it seemed too easy. And so I went bow only. And for big game, I've been bow only ever since. So
I love it. Do you feel like you have more opportunities because you choose archery tags, or is it now even more difficult to fill those tags, especially when you're talking about going west?
I would say probably yes and no. So, and as those who are familiar with at least various states and their draw application processes and everything, it it definitely can be easier to obtain an archery only tag. I understand that, and we can talk about it in a minute. But I wouldn't have been able to go on this hunt that I went on this year if I didn't put in for the archery only option. But so yes and no. There's certainly times where you're discouraged and you're like, man, it'd be so easy, just
Right.
to reach out, get this done with a rifle. But that's why I went bow only, because it's easy.
Yeah.
And I there's something special about chasing these animals with a bow, man.
I love it. I love it. All right, brother. Well, I want you to take it away. Tell us about this adventure of going west to Colorado on your hunt, because there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are newer hunters, or maybe they only hunt their local state or whatever it is, and here you were, you planned this great adventure and you set off on it. So take us through it.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start with the beginning, and that is I wouldn't have been able to go. I went at the invitation of our Western staff coordinator here at Fall Session. His name's Tim Burgess. He's been hounding me for 3 or 4 seasons now to come out there and hunt with them. Like, hey, come on, come on! I want you to come out here, hunt the family farm in far northeastern Colorado. And yeah, he's been very patient with me, because my previous non-resident Western, if you will, hunting experience has been limited to 2018 and 2019. I hunted pronghorn with a bow in Montana, and I loved that experience so much that it I almost honed in on it too much, because
Hmm.
I was successful. I shot a stud of a pronghorn with my bow in 2018 on that hunt. Went back in 2019 and ate a tag sandwich. And then I put in for that hunt 2020, 21, and 22, and I did not get drawn
Mm.
for any. In hindsight, those are 3 years that I could have been putting in for something else. I definitely want to go back, still do want to go back and hunt pronghorn again, but I have all these other things
Hmm.
too that I want to do. And so after 3 years of not getting drawn for the pronghorn, I was like, you know what, I need to do something different this year.
Yeah.
And Tim right there again with the same invite that he's always had for me. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna put in for this Colorado tag that Tim keeps talking about. And of course, Tim has told this on our podcast too. He's like, well, if you had, started putting in for points like 3, 4 years ago when I started hounding you, you could have had a rifle tag by now. Thing. And of course, stubborn me, I didn't do that. But I put in this year for the archery only tag. It was a deer tag, so it was good for either sex, whitetail or muleys up there. And I had told Tim beforehand, I was like, look, man, I was like, if a big whitetail walks out in front of me, like, yeah, I'm gonna have a hard time not shooting it, obviously. But I said my goal is a mule deer. Like,
Yeah.
I've never killed mule deer before. I've never hunted mule deer before. My goal's a mule deer. So to give you some context on where this is we are almost as close to Nebraska as you can get without being in Nebraska. Like the farmhouse that we're staying in is literally a half mile from the Colorado Nebraska state line. You can stand in the driveway and see Nebraska.
Oh,
So
wow.
we're right there. Um, and this is Tim's family farm. Um, they've had it for generations. His grandparents still live on the place. And I can't say enough for his grandparents and his family and everybody up there, because um man, I've hunted with outfitters before where you didn't get this kind of warm welcome and just high class service. And
Yeah.
like they're they they are there for hunters. Like they do a big family pheasant hunt opening. It's bigger than Christmas, like opening day of pheasants up there and everything. Like everybody comes out. They're used to serving hunters, and that's what they do. That's just their type of old school hospitality, which is really cool. And we got to experience that. But um, man, this I'm looking around like after we get there, and this is rifle country. Like Tim told me, he just about said in the nicest way possible, "You're dumb for wanting to come up here and bow hunt," because nobody, not joking, nobody has ever killed anything out there with a bow before,
Mm.
ever. And at least to that family's knowledge and on that family farm, Tim has a bow, but he's never really, just dove big into the bow hunting out there, and nobody successfully killed one with a bow. So that that was kind of like, all right, well, that adds to the challenge, I guess. We'll see how this is. And man, it's flat. It is. Yes, it's not what people think of when they think of Colorado. It's not these mountainous, beautiful. It's beautiful in its own way, but it's not these mountainous views or anything like that. It's flat country.
Yeah.
And so I'm going up there. We had another guy in camp with us, the producer of actually our Midwest Mindset series on Carbon TV, Mike Teepee. He came out also. Tim's family hooked him up with a landowner voucher out there for a whitetail tag. It was good for bow, and then when rifle season came, he could go with a rifle too. So, couple different tag options. But he got into camp a day and a half after I did.
Excuse me.
So coming in, when I'm driving in, I drove in just about a snowstorm. It's like 6 to 8 inches of snow the night that I got in, and it was not the first day of hunting that I. The ironic part is, this is my third out of state hunt that I've ever had in my life, and this is the third out of state hunt where the first day I was hunting in the snow.
Wow.
I don't know. It's just, I guess that's my curse. But we were hunting in the snow the first day, and the first day, man, we didn't see anything all day, and it's not sitting in a blind or anything like that. Like, we're mobile. We're in a truck, and we're driving these dirt farm roads. We're going to all these different places that Tim knows the hot spots or where the deer normally are, and we're not seeing anything at all. And it's very, to me, I'm like, man, I knew this was going to be hard, but in my mind, I'm thinking, I at least thought I'd be seeing some deer,
Yeah.
And so, and Tim was kind of scratching his head too, just the weather and everything. The moon was not in our favor, and the weather, all that combined, it made for a slow start for sure.
Yeah.
And we're hunting the family farm, which is 3,000 acres that they own, and then we have a lot of permission pieces in this area, in this unit. Tim's family is very well connected, so pretty much anywhere we could find deer was a phone call away from having permission to hunt the property. We didn't have it already. That is, and I think we mapped it at the end as far as how much, to give folks an idea how much area we had to cover. I think over the course of the 6-7 days we actually hunted, we scouted a little over 68,000 acres according to Onyx.
Wow.
So we were moving. We put 1,300 miles on the farm truck, like driving these roads and everything in that week. So it was a grind. But day one, it ended with me seeing the first deer, just a couple muley does about 600 yards out right before legal light ended. And then that was how day one ended. Like, there wasn't anything else to day one other than just looking at what felt like snow-covered fields.
Uh-huh.
So we got into day two. Mike got into camp that afternoon, and I still hadn't seen anything. They ended up dropping me on the edge of the CRP. They had a CRP field. They called it the North CRP. That was close to the house. It was on the home farm. And that was, according to Tim, like the hot spot. That's like where all these muleys in particular like to hang out. And we came to the conclusion basically, hey, let's drop me right there for the evening, like last 30, 45 minutes of light, and just see if I can see them leaving their beds. Mm-hmm. Because what I was quickly having to learn was these muleys, like, it's a foreign concept to me, a Texas boy, but they live in these CRP fields, and they bed in these CRP and these wheat fields. And when they bed, you can't see them. Like, it blew my mind. Like, you could tell me that and be like, okay, yeah. But driving by, it looks so flat. You don't realize how much cover this thick grass actually gives these
Hmm.
deer. So in that we were just thinking, man, they got to be hiding in these fields. They got to be hunkered down and they're feeding at night. So we were just, I don't know, trying to figure it out, trying to figure where they were. Long story short, I sat on that North CRP. I saw nothing, but the other two guys, they kept driving farm roads, and they ended up seeing a group of muleys come out of another hot spot that Tim knew of with a nice buck in the group. And so we came to the conclusion, like, hey, if we'll keep doing this driving around, trying to find them grind in the morning. But if it doesn't work in the morning, then we're going to go into this little piece that they saw this big group in, and we're going to put a pop up blind in there. We're going to Texas style hunt these mule deer. Like that's our thought. And so that was our mentality ending day 2, and day 3 is when things finally got interesting. So day 3 is when it's amazing, man. It's like a switch flips on when it goes from just down the dumps to, oh crap, here we go.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question real quick about optics, because
Yeah.
it piques my interest. Being out west, it was always for me. I'm like, I want the best optics possible, because I'm looking at picking animals out of shadows and distance and all that. Did you feel like your optics were up to par for what you were looking at, especially when you're trying to pick deer out of grass and like, I don't know. Explain, because down here in Texas, I feel like a lot of guys will just hunt with most basic or simplest pair, and might not even have some, and so they kind of just go out there. What was your thought when it came to optics for this Western hunt?
I was definitely underprepared.
Yeah.
Uh, Tim Tim was our saving grace. Tim has the latest and greatest, the right equipment for the job out there. So him kind of being our guide for the first several days, it was it was helpful. I'm a cheap bow hunter. I'm a blue collar guy. So my stuff, a lot of my gear is pieced together. And to give you an idea, first off, neither myself or Fall Obsession, we do not have an optics sponsor at this time. So at this time, I can say this freely. I have a Bushnell rangefinder, a pair of Nikon binoculars, and I carry them around a Vortex uh,
Bino harness.
vinyl harness. So I'm repping everybody, man. I'm repping everybody. But my little Texas Nikon binoculars were not enough for what we had out there. I mean, yes, they got the job done, but in hindsight, a much higher quality and higher power set of binoculars would have been advantageous for me to have out there, if not a spotting scope, just altogether. But
Yeah, right. Let your eyes do the walking rather than having to put on so many miles with your feet or with the car as well. Okay, so you said day 3 is when things got interesting. So what happened?
so it was in the morning. We went to a different piece of walk in, which for those that might not know, I didn't know until this year when I went out there. There's this area of Colorado, at least, there's two different types of walk in. There's white sign and yellow sign. White, it's basically these privately owned pieces, but every year they contract them out to the state to basically be public land, and the state writes the landowner a check so that they can be publicly hunted. If it's white sign, it means that it's small game only, like pheasants, that kind of stuff. If it's yellow sign, then it's small game and big game hunting.
Hmm.
And you yellow sign your land, the landowner gets a bigger check from the government. But so it was this piece of yellow sign, public, basically access, that we found in an area that we weren't familiar with. Because at this point, we're branching out. Like, we're not finding the deer that we want to find close to home, so we're branching out. And we spot this little itty bitty, like, yearling, Forky, basically, out there. And he's just staring at the truck. And Tim kind of looks over at me. We're all three in the truck. And Tim's like, "You want to make a play?" And I'm like, "I don't want to kill this deer, but I want to do something other than drive around. So I'm like, yeah, I'll make a play. Why not? I haven't gotten a single stalk in. Like, let me get out and run around in the 20-degree cold, you know?
Yeah,
So
test your skills a little bit.
yeah, exactly. So they back up, they drop me off I mean, about as much of a hill that you're going to get out there on the other side of it. And I start trying to loop back around in front of this little buck. Last we saw, he was kind of walking away. When I finally catch a glimpse of him, he's like hopping over the next hill. And I found out later he got spooked by the truck when they moved after they dropped me off. So I went at least and topped the hill that he topped to see where he went, and he didn't go much farther because he's a young deer and he's not very smart, in my opinion. So he's just right on the next hill. Like, and I range him. He's 186 yards from me, and he's gradually working to my right. So I'm like, you know what? I'll go back the way I came. I'll loop around and maybe see if I can get in front of him. So I started executing that plan. Um, he did finally see me move, and so that's what stopped. I just stopped where I was, and then he just started walking toward me, just curious, a curious young deer. He's just walking up to me, and I'm like, man, again, I don't want this to be my mule deer, but I have gotten a taste on how hard it's going to be to fill a tag out here. I want to be successful, and if this deer is just going to walk right up to me, like, I'm going to take a shot.
You and I had a discussion this fall, which I found
Yep, we did.
extremely interesting. I was getting game cam pics of a bunch of different bucks, and obviously you could rank them versus maturity and large scale racks and all that. And I put a poll up on my social media, and I said, "Do I shoot or do I pass?" And it was a picture of a younger buck, but wide, and I thought it was like, oh, real nice.
Yeah.
Real nice, Clark. We're going Christmas vacation style since it's the holidays right now. Um, so everyone outside of Texas said shoot. Everyone from within the state of Texas said pass, hold out for your target buck. I've been used to Western hunting where you don't really like you can get on big animals. I'm not gonna say I'm like anything amazing as a hunter. I've been limited on my time, so I can't like pass on a game animal and then be like, okay, well, we'll give it a few more days and see how it is. Usually I'm a weekend warrior. Take off a Friday of work and drive Thursday night, hunt Friday, all day Saturday, half a Sunday, and come home or whatever. Those are like what my hunts have been. And so if there's a legal animal in front of me, more likely than not, I'm shooting at it. Now, I had a conversation with Tim Corcoran. He's the founder of Twin Eagles Wilderness School up in Idaho and the creator of Purpose Mountain, where he talks about um, coming of age ceremonies and wilderness rites and adventures. And all right, everybody, thank you so much for listening to this episode. As a thank you, I got more discount codes for all of you. If you are in the market for anything in regards to calls, whether it's elk calls, turkey calls, deer or predator calls, you can save 15% on all Rocky Mountain hunting calls by using the code SOULSEEKERS. That's all one word. And if you're in the market for hard side hydration, a better way to hydrate, go check out hardsidehydration.com. Use the code SOULSEEKERS10 to save 10%. And we also have a discount at Graxaw.com. Graxaw is the leader in ultralight game bags and other backcountry gear. Light, fast, and efficient is their motto. Use the code SOULSEEKERS, all one word, to save 10% at checkout. And he really goes by the Native American ways in which you do not pass up on an animal that presents itself because it presents itself as a gift. So as you're telling me the story and the deer starts walking at you, I mean, I'm already being like, all right, well, looks like this one's going in the back of the truck with us really quick.
Yeah.
Is that what happened?
Not with this deer. this this is my get my feet wet stalk. So, and he starts walking toward me, and I can make out in the grass a trail that he's on. And what ended up hurting me was when he started, he was to the west of me. So when he would look back toward me, he was also looking back into the morning sun.
Mm.
this trail that he was cruising on, it looped all the way around to the east of me. So when he was finally within bow range, which the trail he was walking on, I ranged the trail at 54 yards.
Yeah.
Finally in bow range of me, um, the sun was on the opposite side. I was looking into the sun, and I was lit up like a Christmas tree standing in this or trying to crouch down this CRP field.
Gotcha.
So he saw me. It was literally like his vitals were still covered. Like 2 more steps, he would have been like an open shot opportunity. But he stopped and he looked at me, and then he took off and ran. And that time when he topped the hill, I was like, nah. My heart wasn't in it to that point, and I was like, all right, I got a feel for it. I got my blood pumping. My hands and my feet are freezing now. At this point, I'm like, all right, let's go find another deer. Like it felt good to get my blood flowing, but I wasn't gonna go after he left the second time. I was like, I'm not gonna keep just chasing this little forky. So
How far of a shot would you have had to take?
I would have, if he had taken those 2-3 steps, it would have been 54 yards.
Okay. So a lot of guys, newer bow hunters, they're always like, oh, 40 yards is my max. Like maybe 30 yards is my max. Being a West, like, I feel like you got to be prepared to let it rip as an archer and hone your
Yeah.
craft also, right? If you're a rifle hunter, you're like, ah, it's 150 and in, or something like that. Like I want to be as deadly as possible from any angle. Were you
Yeah.
preparing for this hunt and being like, okay, I got to be ready to launch one?
Yes. So the first year in 2018, when I went out west and I went pronghorn hunting, my really the max, I've been bow hunting for a long time. I've been shooting a bow for a long time. I won't say that the max range that I could have been comfortable shooting was this, but the bow I had that year was only set up really to shoot 60, 70 yards max.
Mhm.
And I was fortunate that year on the pronghorn I killed him at 41 yards. So wasn't an issue. But that first year I recognized quickly, like, hey, if I come back, I need to be able to do more.
Yeah.
Following year and every year since then, my setup has been capable of going every bit of 100 yards. And I know in 2019, when I went back, I was training and preparing for that. I was ready for those 100-yard shots. I probably, just because I didn't run for any out of state tags the 3 years that followed, I probably was not as sharp those 3 years as I was just hunting Texas.
Yep.
But this year, found out I was going. I was like, all right, it's time to get back in the swing of things.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I was 100% comfortable. If I ranged an animal at 100 yards, it was getting an arrow flung at it. That was like, if I have an open shot at an animal at that range or under, I'm flinging an arrow. If it's the last day and I haven't filled the tag yet, and it's at 120, it's probably getting an arrow flung at it. So
Well,
that,
as long as you are working your skill set and you're feeling confident on your shots, like you get armchair quarterbacks a lot of the time saying, "Oh man, you shouldn't be doing that," or all this. Like, dude, I know what I am capable of. I know what my skill set is, and if you practice it, it's totally doable. So I love that. Okay, so you ended up passing on this little forky, and you're glad you did because ultimately you're like, you know, I'm from Texas and we don't shoot the the first buck that shows up. So what ended up
my heart wasn't.
You're right. So what ended up happening?
So I get back to the truck. The guys even told me, they're like, dude, you're kind of jacked up. Like, I was just excited. Like, it got the blood pumping. I was like, man, that deer was in bow range. Like, I didn't have a shot, but that deer was in bow range. That was cool. And so we get back in the truck, and my excitement quickly took a dive back down, just because for the next hour and a half, nothing. We
Oh,
weren't seeing anything. And normally our routine every day was around midday, around lunchtime, just because the farmhouse is right there. We'd go back to the farmhouse, warm up real quick, get a sandwich, and then we go back out for the rest of the day.
yeah.
That was kind of our routine. So we were heading back toward the house, and it was around 10 o'clock that day, I think. And that little Forky was the only deer we'd seen all morning. Again, we had just talked the night before about how, okay, if morning 3 doesn't work, we're freaking throwing a ground blind in this little, patch of evergreens, and we're Texas hunting these muleys that are hanging out in there. Like that was our plan. We're like, all right. So we're heading back to the house, and literally we come up to a T in the road. House is to the right, a loop around the home farms to the left, and Tim, he's driving. He hangs a left, and Mike and I are both kind of looking at each other, and we didn't even say anything, but Tim could just sense our frustration, like, oh, where are we going now? Just because it's been 3 days now of just hardly seeing anything. And Tim, without even Mike and I say anything, Tim's already trying to justify himself. He's like, look, guys, he said, y'all may not wonder, but I'm going to wonder if we don't do one more lap around the home farm. He goes, it's going to take us 5-10 minutes to make the lap. He goes, and we'll know. At least we'll know. And we're like, all right, fine, whatever. So we turned down the first road, and we're heading north. There's the South CRP. The road's about a mile long. There's a South CRP, and then there's this big wheat stubble field, and then there's the critically acclaimed North CRP, basically, the hot spot. So we passed the South CRP, nothing. We passed the wheat stubble, nothing. We're passing the North CRP, and right around the same time, Mike and I are both looking out the window. We're both like, oh, there's a deer. And so Tim starts slowing down, and Mike and I are like, we're trying to get our binoculars out. We're trying to look and everything, and we can tell this buck is, I don't know, 150 or so yards off the road, but we can tell it's a buck.
Yeah.
Tim was very smart. He did slow down, but then he sped back up. He was very smart to not just stop there and look at the deer and probably bump him. He kept, and we're like that. I mean, at that time, it was like, that's the biggest buck that we've seen out here, like this whole 3 days. So we drive all the way up to the next intersection, to the northwest corner of this field, basically. We're about a third of a mile at this point from this deer, and we're looking back down into the field, and we can see him. He's just standing there, looking around, turn his head, and he is not really in the best spot. First off, he's in the middle of the freaking field. So there's nothing around this joker. The wind, I mean, we're still in the pickup. It wasn't that big of a deal, but the wind is blowing from the northwest. So from where we're at currently, it's blowing from us to him. And he's facing southeast, so he's facing downwind. He is facing the way that I would need to come in on a stalk. And I'm like, golly, this is not great.
Yeah.
So we kind of debate, the three of us, back and forth as far as what is our plan going to be? What are we going to do here with this buck? The conclusion we come to is, and it's a long trek around to make this happen. It's a lot longer distance than it seems, but they're going to go all the way around and kind of in the corner of the wheat stubble field, which is the field south of the North CRP. Kind of in the corner there's a patch of evergreen trees. They're like, we're going to drop you on the backside of these evergreen trees, and then we're going to come. The guys are telling me they're going to come back to the northwest corner right there and park on the road on that hill, and they're going to watch the deer and try to help steer me into them. I'm like, worth a shot. At least we're coming in from downwind. So they drop me in those trees, and they have to kind of help me navigate around a little bit. And I end up like walking out into the middle of the wheat stubble field. Just like, that was how I needed to get to where they were. And what they ended up doing is they lined me up with the truck, because I could see the truck a third to a half mile away from me. I could see it parked way out there on the road, but I couldn't see the deer. Like, there was a gradual slope down, and the buck had bedded back down in the CRP, so I had no idea where he was. So they could see the deer. So they decided, you know what, we're just gonna line you up with the truck. That way the deer is in between you and the truck, just to work your stalk toward the truck, and that's gonna put you in line with this deer. I'm like, works for me.
Yeah.
So I walked a long way on foot, a long way. I covered some ground. And then when I actually got to the edge of the North CRP where the wheat transitioned, I was still 200, 250 yards from where they were saying this deer was.
Mm.
Told me, they're like, hey, when you get to that CRP edge, you can't walk anymore. You're gonna have to start crawling. So there's still snow on the ground. I'm crawling around on the ground. My gloves are soaking wet with freaking snow. My hands are cold. And I'm crawling through the CRP field is all it is. And it was windy, which helped me. The wind's blowing in my face, and it's a pretty stout wind, so it's
Yeah.
covering a lot of noise. So I just keep crawling, and they sent me a couple of texts every now and then, bump like, hey, angle a little bit more to your left or whatever it was, just to make sure I was in line. But for the last 150 yards or so of this stalk, I had very little communication with them, and they kept saying, they're like, they couldn't see me, like black beanie on. And it was only when my head would kind of pop up that they would be like, okay, yep, there's Sam. And they get an idea of that, but the rest of the time they couldn't see me. So the camo was doing its job, but we're getting down in there, and the buck, I remember, I would crawl, move my bow, crawl, move my bow, just a gradual grind away. And finally I kind of look up, and in this really thick patch of grass, and I mean, it's the thickest stuff out there, I can see just ears and antlers at the top of that grass. And that grass is like 4 or 5 feet high. Like it's chest high on me, where how tall that grass is.
Yeah.
And all I see are antlers. And I'm like, oh crap, there he is. And I can't get a range into that thick stuff, but there's a low spot to the left of this big patch that he's in. And I'm looking at that low spot, and it looks like it's about the same distance from me to him. So I just start ranging that low spot, like that's going to get me close. And I range it, it's at 62 yards, and it's windy. I'm like, man, if he walks out of the grass either way, I'm going to fling an arrow, but it's probably not going to be a great one because he's going to be moving, and it's windy, and it's at 62 yards.
Mm.
So I'm thinking I need this deer to bed back down so that I can get closer. And this deer, he hadn't seen me. He's just looking around, like just chilling in that grass. So very slowly, I'm just creeping. I'm creeping, like almost on my belly,
Yeah.
creeping. And finally, I kind of peek up, and I don't see the deer anymore. But I also didn't see him leave. And this was the last text I had with the guys up there. I was just like, hey, did he bed back down? Because I want to know, did he leave or did he bed back down? And they said, yes, he bedded back down. And I'm like, cool. And then the guys, they sent me a text. They're like, hey, man, you got this. And man, you think about it, it's like we went from like me when I was back in those evergreens, I'm like no real confidence. Like, I'm going to try this, but no real confidence that this is going to work,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And you see all these hunting shows, whether on TV or online or wherever it is, and it's like, you see these guys do these stalks or getting close with a bow, and you're always thinking like, yeah, it'd be cool to do that one day. And that certainly was the dream for me, was to do a spot and stuff. I didn't want to sit blind while I was up there, but if that's what it was going to take, I would have done it. But when they sent me that text, that's just my whole mentality changed. I was like, I'm going to kill this freaking deer.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to freaking do this, and they gave me that boost of confidence, and that was their intent behind it. And I was ready, man. At that point, I was like, we're going to take our time. We're going to be patient, and we're just going to creep on in here with this buck.
Yeah.
Like that was where I don't know, just my drive kind of changed, I guess, a little bit, you'd say, as if I wasn't already driven enough crawling through the CRP. So he's bedded back down, and I keep on creeping, and eventually I range that spot, and it's at 38 yards. I'm like, all right, let's do this. I've seen those videos where, guys draw back and then, grunt or meh at them and get a deer to stand up and then shoot him. Like, I'm going to do that. So I don't like, I know where he was, like my window, but I don't know exactly where he's bedded. So I come to full draw, and I stand up and I'm just looking. I don't see antlers. I don't see anything. And so I'm just like, he's just going to pop up somewhere in here. Like, I'm going to have to be ready. I've already adjusted my sight. Like, I'm ready to go. So I get up. I'm just, meh, meh. I'm just yelling at him at this point, and nothing is happening. And like, I call like 6 or 7 times and nothing happens. So I just let back down and sit back down. I'm like, well, that didn't work.
Dude, you got
I'm
me
like,
cracking up right now.
the only thing I can think of is like, well, I guess I'll get closer.
Yeah.
So I just keep crawling in. And at this point, like, I am in the patch of grass that I last saw this deer in. Like, I am in there with point. And I'm kind of getting a little uncomfortable. I'm like, he could be right freaking in front of me and I wouldn't know it. Like, this stuff is so thick, especially when you're crawling. So finally, I ranged that spot I've been ranging at 28. I'm like, all right, put my sight at 28. I'm thinking, all right, I need to find this deer before I try any of this crazy stuff again. So I stand up, like almost all the way up, and I have my binoculars and I'm looking like right in front of me. And I'm trying to find anything that looks like a deer so that I can figure out where he's bedded.
Yeah.
That way when I'm calling, I know where he is. I know where he's going to stand up. I'm not having to guess. So finally, like, I've been looking for like 2 minutes and I hadn't seen anything. And finally, I see an antler in front of me. And I'm like, okay, he's right there. Which way is he facing? Because I want to know what he's going to look like when he stands up.
Mm-hmm.
Studying this antler, like trying to see an ear or a head or something that'll tell me which way he's facing. Finally, I see the white of his ear. It's like, okay, he's facing me. He's looking like he hadn't seen me, but he's looking my way. Like, all right. So I'm mentally thinking as an archer, like, okay, where's my shot going to be on this deer when he stands up?
Yeah.
So same drill. Here we go again. I come to full draw. I stand up, and this time I'm on him. Like, I know where he's at. I start going through it all again, and I see his butt coming up. I'm like, okay, here we go. And man, it was like it was meant to be, because when his front end came up and he popped up above that grass looking at me, my pin was already sitting exactly where it needed to go. So it was just a squeeze away, and that arrow was off. The guys in the told me that from their perspective, because they're watching the whole thing in the binos, they said from their perspective, it looked like he just stood up and ran. Like, there was no delay from the time he stood up to the time I shot. And in my mind, like, it didn't happen that fast, because in my mind, my archery brain slows everything down in the moment.
Right.
So, like, I saw my pin settle, I released, I saw my arrow in flight, I heard the impact. As he turned and ran, I saw my arrow sticking out of him. Like, I have all these snapshots in my mind. I know the sequence of events, but it was all apparently, so I'm told, in a split second. And Johnny, I'm coming off like this whole hunt. I'm coming off of an experience down here in Texas 2 weeks before this hunt, 2 weeks to the day, where I shot a whitetail in Texas that I never recovered.
Mm.
And I don't say that lightly, because that's a gut punch to any bow hunter, is what that is. But I had some nerves, like, coming off that hunt, because again, in my mind, I'm like, man, I'm supposed to be able to shoot a mule deer at 80 to 100 yards in 2 weeks, and I can't kill a whitetail at 40.
Mm-hmm.
So I bring that up just to say, like, I'm not celebrating yet. Like, this deer takes off and runs, and I'm glued to him. Like, I'm watching him. Like, I want to see this deer go down, because I don't want a repeat of what just happened
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I watch him. He runs about 100 yards out into the field, and he stops, and he's just standing there. And I'm just thinking, please go down, please go down, please go down. And finally, I see that nose take a dive. And that's about as long as I could hold off before the hands went up in the air and up and down. And about that time, the truck is peeling out on that dirt road coming down to get me. Like, it was a party out in the field at that point in time. It was
Man,
awesome.
that is epic. So what type of shot did you end up taking on him? He was did he end up being like direct on or quartering to a little bit, or how'd that work?
So he was hard quartering to me.
Yeah.
hard. Like when I shot, I had my pin set on the like in between his breastbone and his shoulder on his right side, right in here, basically angling back in, and it hit meat on his shoulder. It nicked his bone just barely, like his shoulder blade, and it hit both lungs and right to his heart.
Wow. That is
Also,
awesome.
picture if I haven't already, I have a picture when we dressed him out of the heart, and there's a perfect broadhead hole in his heart. It was pretty cool.
That is incredible. How far did that deer end up running?
He ran about 100 yards. So, and that's what's kind of funny is, take you over to the truck. Again, I obviously wasn't there, but these guys have been watching me for over 2 hours
Mhm.
trying to put a stalk on this deer. And those poor guys, they started telling me about how much their shoulders hurt from holding their binos like this for 2 hours and everything. I'm like, cry me a river. Come on. No, just kidding. They're awesome. But they watched the whole thing, and like right after I shot, Mike's in the passenger seat, like grabbing Tim, like, he got him, he got him. He's all excited. Tim's all business. Like Tim's excited, but Tim's all business because Tim has lost deer in these CRP fields because it's very hard to blood trail just with the coloring and everything and the thick grass. It can be hard to blood trail, especially if you don't have an exit wound, which I didn't, um, on your animal. So Tim's like watching the deer. He's watching where the deer goes down, and he wants to drive straight to where he saw the deer go down. And Mike's like, "No, take me to Sam. Take me to Sam." Like he's yelling at him. They're yelling at each other in the truck. They ended up coming to me first. And Mike gets out. He's filming, and he's all excited. And like, I think he was more excited than me, honestly. Like
Yeah.
jumping up and down. And Tim is still like, "We gotta find the deer. We gotta find." Like Tim's all business. He does not want to lose a deer. So I went to, thankfully in the snow I could see where I was. I went back to where I was standing when I shot, where I was standing when I saw him go down, and I was able to direct them out there like, hey, that's the area that I saw him go down. And Mike's out there walking around. He's on the phone with me talking, and finally he just cuts himself off mid set, puts his arms up in the air, all like, I got him. And I took off running across that field. I was so excited. I just
Dude, that's awesome.
had a deer.
I mean, it makes sense if that it's hard to find a deer that once it goes down in that. If you were able to belly crawl within 30 yards of a buck and not see it, you're having to glass 30 yards away from you. Makes sense that if it runs off, it's got to be hard to find. So,
Yeah. No,
so
they were right to want to find it quick. I wanted to also. So
now you guys filmed for Texas Dirt. Was this? Did they film you the process of you standing up and calling?
so we filmed the trip. This hunt definitely has some gaps in the production. One, just being honest with you, man, the last thing that I was worried about on that stalk was that
Yeah,
was the thing I was worried about. And they're parked like between a half and a third mile away from me. We didn't have uh we were dumb. We didn't have a like a scope camera or like a one of the phone mounts or anything with us.
yeah,
So any footage that we would have had, it was simply like, well, this black dot is Sam on the screen, and this little brown dot you can't really see is supposedly the deer. Like that would have been the extent of our footage.
yeah.
So the hunt itself, the stalk itself, the footage wasn't, the production wasn't what we hoped it'd be. But um, regardless of that, we did film a majority of the trip. We do have some killer footage, and definitely even just the capturing the in the moment experiences and reactions after the kill. Like
Mhm.
film the crap out of it after I shot. So capturing those moments, it's worth a production. And we will be, as Fall Obsession, we will be posting a standalone video on our YouTube channel from this hunt here in a week or two. So
Oh, that's cool. That's good to hear. I can't wait to watch it and check it out. So, you got your first mule deer. Did you have an idea of how big this buck was, or what did it look like? Or were you just like, that's a buck and I'm going for it and I can see that like I'm not having to squint for antlers, so I know it's like decent, or what was your thought?
So I knew it was a buck, and from when we were sitting a third of a mile away, before I ever started the stalk and we were trying to come up with our plan, we're all looking at this deer, and I'm looking at it in my crappy binos from Texas. So I'm make out a frame at least on this deer, and it's like, okay, yeah, that is the big deer that we've seen and everything. And man, what's he is a really cool buck. He doesn't have the traditional traits of a mule deer as far as like the tall frame or the deep splits or anything like that. His antlers honestly kind of resemble a whitetail more than ironic, but he's still a freaking mule deer. And I knew that like we were trying to pick it apart. Mike kept telling me, he's like, I know he's got 4 points on one side. I saw 4 points on one side. And at this point, I'm just like, man, he's bigger than a Forky. Like, I didn't really care,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna make a move on the steer, and certainly when I was looking at him through the grass when he stood up, when I finally saw him during the stalk, I was, I'm looking at him like I see tines, I see points, like I can't really make out what's on what antler, and honestly, in that moment, I didn't. It was just, you know, he was a nice buck, and what he ended up being I believe I'm using the term correctly as a Texas hunter here. A 4x3, I think is what you call him.
Did he have eye
But
guards?
so he did.
So
Uh,
a 4x3 with eye guards is what we called out
but,
west.
but one of the eye guards is split also.
Oh.
By Texas standards, he's a 10 point. But and what's really cool, and it kind of sucks, but it's still kind of a cool story. Like this deer, despite being, by muley standards, a younger buck at least, he was a fighter. Like he had this big old scar on his back from where he'd been fighting, and probably gotten. It looked like he'd gotten gored or something at one point on his kind of his lower back, and he had what was really unique about him is his G3 on both sides. He basically grew it twice. Like it's not like there's one point and then a point right next to it. It's like this point grew twice and grew out opposite direction on both sides. It was really cool. He broke it off on his right side. So he
Ah,
would have had, by Texas standards 12 points had he kept that, or 11 points, whatever it is. But he was it was still really cool, and to kind of see that double G3. I don't know. I've never here.
that's cool. Did you end up caping him out and bringing home the cape, or are you just doing a euro?
So I debated it a little bit as far as what I wanted to do. Because the only animal I've ever shoulder mounted before in my life was my pronghorn that I killed. And I mean, granted, he's a Pope and Young pronghorn. He's a stud. But for this buck, I decided I was going to shoulder mount for a variety of reasons. It's funny actually. My taxidermist called me today to ask me like, "Hey, how do you want to position? What form do you want? All that stuff." But
Yeah,
uh, and to take my money. So, but the uh, for me, the obvious thing I think, as I mentioned, like his antlers kind of resemble a whitetail, like not the traditional mule deer, deep splits or anything like that. So for that reason alone, I'm like, if I just did a euro, a skull or something on him, it would be kind of hard to tell the difference between him and a whitetail to somebody who didn't know,
yeah, yeah.
So that was one reason, and then two, it's my very first mule deer, and the experience and the story just I felt like all those things combined, like what are the chances that all this came together like it did? And I think in my mind that made it worth an actual shoulder mount on this animal. So
Ah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love it. I love it. So, what'd you learn from this hunt?
a lot. I learned a lot about deer in a different environment.
Mm,
Mike and I talked with Tim during the week because this was only day 3. We still had 3-4 more days of hunting that followed this experience, and we can talk about that briefly here in a second. But throughout the course of the week, we learned a lot about these deer in a different world, because the whole time, like Mike's from the Midwest, I'm from the South, so we're trying to bring our mentality of not just hunting, but also just whitetail or deer behavior
Uh-huh.
out here west. And Tim's like, no, that's not how these deer are out here. Like, Tim's hunted out here for 21 years. He's like, that's not how these deer are. These deer are not like any deer you've ever seen before, as
Huh.
far as how they behave. And Mike and I were proved wrong so many times. I don't know why we kept questioning Tim, really, because every time we were freaking proved wrong with how these deer acted. But it was very interesting. I learned a lot just about having to understand the same animal, whitetail, because there are whitetails out there, whitetail being one, but the same animal or deer out there, but that act and behave completely different, and you have to hunt them differently.
Yeah.
I learned that when you're bow hunting rifle country, it's a challenge. It's something that is not to be taken lightly. And what's really cool, man, is, and I'm not trying to, I don't want this to sound like I'm bragging, but nobody in a century, at least, to, to, that this family knows personally,
Yeah.
has ever killed an animal with a bow out there.
Mm.
It was funny because Tim's grandparents, they live on the property. They live with the farmhouse, so we'd have dinner with them every night. And his grandpa would ask me, he'd be like, so what, like, he just threw these things out there every evening. What made you want to come out here and bow hunt? Like, nobody's ever done that before,
Right.
and it's funny because when we did come back with one, they like couldn't believe it. Like, it was time to celebrate. They were in shock that I got one out there, just because they never really hosted a bow hunter before.
Yeah.
And so he came out to see the deer in the back of the truck when we got back, and he was like, man, I want to shake your hand because I didn't think you were going to do it. Like, and then he goes back in the house. It was funny. He goes back in the house and he gets on his landline phone, and he starts calling people. And he's like, hey, you'll never guess what happened here today. Yeah, Tim brought his friend from Texas up here with a bow. And then there's a pause. And he's like, I know, right? Well, guess what? I got one today. It was this big deal, and they were eager to share it with other people, which just it made it even more special to me,
Yeah.
to get to bring them that kind of excitement. Like, I didn't expect that, but I learned, man, I learned so much,
Uh-huh.
because the other thing, and one thing that I would encourage anybody who wants to try something new, or sees something on a hunting show, for example, because this was me. I remember watching an episode of one of the big name hunting shows, and I watched this dude, and this was in my mind the whole hunt. I watched this dude sneak up on this monster muley in a cornfield and shoot him at like 20 yards with a bow. And in my mind, like, I remember when I was a kid and I saw that hunt, I was like, man, that'd be cool. Like, that's cool.
Yeah.
I want to do. Well, guess what, folks? You can do that.
Yeah.
Like, it takes drive, and it takes some willpower, but you can do that.
Mhm.
And I listened to your last podcast, with, is it Hollywood?
Yeah.
Hollywood.
Dave Veronio. Yeah.
Yeah, Dave. I listened to your last podcast, and great episode, by the way. It was, I enjoyed the heck out of it.
Oh,
But
thank you.
uh, y'all mentioned or referred to a quote in that episode, and I'm horrible with quotes, man. You know that about me. But was it went something like, if you want to, what is it? If you want to do something that's never been done before, do something you've never done before, you got to try something you've never tried before,
Yeah.
or
Yeah,
you
so the definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing over and over
yeah.
again and expecting different results. So if you want to get different results, you have to do something different than what you've always done. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I heard that. I heard y'all talking about that, and y'all expanded on that in that podcast. And I was thinking the whole time, I was like, man, that's what it's all about. Like, and that's my encouragement to anybody who is listening to this podcast who may not have who may have seen something like that, whatever it might be.
mhm,
And then that'd be really cool to be able to do that one day. You got to go do it, and it's not gonna fall in your lap. That's one thing that I know is, and if I take anything away from it, like, yeah, I had this dream of putting a stalk on a mule deer buck in, whatever environment, take your pick.
yeah.
But um it's a lot of work. Like, it was a lot of patience. It was over 2 hours from start to finish. And I know sometimes it can be longer than that, but 2 hours start to finish for this one stalk in particular. And like I said, crawling through grass and weeds and pokey stuff. There is pokey stuff in Colorado. Crawling through all that crap, snow. Like, my gloves were soaked, my hands were freezing. Like, it. I'm not trying to make it sound like it was fun, but in the end, when I actually released that arrow, like, or even when I came to full draw, none of that stuff was on my mind. It was it was just, my focus was on the moment all that had come to.
When you go through your shot process, is there certain like hinges that you are always coming to? Like, get your back elbow up, get your back elbow up. Or are you reminding yourself of anything through your process? Or were you just 100% focused on that deer's up, my pin's on it, send it?
So I'm a believer in not practicing or not shooting until you get it right, but practicing and creating and building that muscle memory until you can't get it wrong.
Mm,
Like, that's how it was kind of portrayed to me at one point, and I really took that and ran with that. Um, so whenever I'm shooting, like whenever I'm training, yeah, I practice these long range shots. I practice from sitting or kneeling, or change it up. Try different scenarios you might feel like you're in. But another thing that I try to do almost as often as I shoot, I either try to start or finish with it as often as I can. But that's simply just, even if your target's only 5 yards away, that's simply just working on your sequence, your shot process, and building that muscle memory. Because for me, I've gotten it to a point, at least with myself, that when I come to full draw, I know where my hand's supposed to be, and I know how it feels when it's right. I
mhm.
know how it feels when it's wrong. And when it's right, my string is going to come through the corner of my mouth, and it's going to touch the tip of my nose, and my peep sight's going to be perfectly lined up. There's a lot of things that have to happen, as far as, like you mentioned, your elbow, how you draw, your anchor, your hand and your arm up front that are holding your bow. All these things have to be right for those little things like I'm talking about to line up. But those little things, those sensitive spots in my face, when I come to full draw on an animal, even if I only have a second to shoot, if I come to full draw and I feel that string on my nose and my mouth, I feel my hand here, and I can see everything is lined up with my peep and my sight, I already know everything else is good, because all that stuff wouldn't have lined up if it wasn't.
Yeah.
Through training and through practicing with a bow, um, through being bow only for so long, those things have just become, they feel more like second nature to me at this point. I know when they're wrong, and I know something needs to change when they're wrong. And like, I'll draw back, and for whatever reason, I'll settle wrong, like in practice. It'll happen every now and then. I let down. All right, let's try again. Figure it out. It happens to everybody. But like, in moments like these are the reason those are important, to have those things established, because you don't want to have to think about how high your elbow is when you're in a situation like this, 28 yards from a mule deer.
Yeah.
You want to, like, be focused on your shot, and where you're aiming and all those other variables you have to think about. Last thing you want to think about is if everything right here is right. You
Mhm.
should know shot long enough. You should know when everything's right and when everything's wrong.
I went full draw on a buck this year in archery season, and I mean, now granted, I've only shot one other deer, and it was a doe with my bow. I specifically bought my bow for hunting elk, so I was like, "Oh, dude, I'm a rifle deer hunter and a archery elk hunter." That way, I didn't have season overlap and competition with that. My game has been changing since coming down to Texas and viewing hunting. But with that being said, when I went full draw on my buck this year, the first thing that went through my head was, "Whoa, that's a small body," and and that even caught me off guard because I was watching this deer, but when I got it in my sights and I shoot a 5 pin, I was like, "Wow, that's a narrow body that I was looking at." Now, granted, the it was a younger deer, but the body of that deer was much smaller than the rest of the deer, but the rack was a lot bigger, and it also was the first legal buck that I was willing to draw on. So it's interesting to hear you talk about this. So you're full on. You're making it so you can't do wrong, and the process of that is fascinating.
It's a mental game, man, and I that's we don't just train so that we can. I mean, yes, we do train so we can make these different types of shots, these long shots, these angled shots, whatever they are. But you should also be training your archery mind, in my opinion. And my mind is to the point, like I mentioned, where when I shoot, like everything slows down. I see everything, or at least I process the shot and the information in slow motion. When I shot that buck 2 weeks prior, the whitetail in Texas that I never recovered, I knew the second I released the arrow, before there was ever impact, I knew where that arrow was going to hit. I knew that arrow was going high. I knew that I had messed up my shot, that I had done wrong,
Mhm.
or that I even ever hit that deer. And in the split second that from the time my arrow left my bow to the time the arrow hit the buck, I've realized all that. I've had that oh crap moment, and I'm praying that this arrow sails over his back and it's a clean miss. Like all that has happened in that short period of time.
Yeah.
And I don't know how else to explain it other than I just call it archery brain. Like that's just how I refer to it because it is there's nothing like it, or at least nothing that I've experienced like it, where you're able to process things or understand things, understand your shot. I mean, you've been there. You've
No,
been on
I can equate
the
to
shot and you're
this.
oh, that's a bad. Like a second you release, you're like, oh, I pulled that. You've
Uh,
been there. You know what that feels like.
being a former athlete, I played quarterback in football, and
Yeah,
getting in the snap, you have your pre-snap read in football. You are assessing what's going to happen before you draw back with the bow. You have your pre-draw assessment of what's going on. But in that process of getting that ball in your hands, taking your drop, and then the defense doing what it does, the game has to slow down for you to be able to make these processes of like, oh, he did this, so I'm going to do that, or
yeah.
this is happening all at the same time. The game kind of slows down. So I know what you're talking about when you're saying from this moment here to the minute or the moment you release that arrow, it's like slow motion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, incredible, incredible. Okay, so just for the sake of wanting to hear what the rest of this week ended up being like, um, give us a quick little rundown on that.
So I killed my deer on a Monday, and so the rifle season didn't open until Friday. So we had 3 days of still archery only season. And now that I'm tagged out, I get to ride in the back seat and be full time cameraman at this point because Mike has that archery tag for whitetail that switches over to rifle on Friday. Tim has a mule deer tag but it's rifle only. So Tim can't even hunt until Friday.
Yeah.
Tim's just out being a guide and a chauffeur for us, and we're extremely grateful for it. But um, needless to say, gear shift the next day. We're focused on getting Mike the whitetail, but man, like we're already like scarce seeing muleys. We haven't even seen a whitetail yet. And it's like, oh man, this might be the real challenge right here is getting him a whitetail.
Yeah.
Uh, and of course, after I kill my buck, and as the snow continues to melt and the temps warm up a little bit, still cold for this Texas boy, but they warmed up a little. The the mule deer start coming out of the woodwork. We're starting to see a whole lot more mule deer, and we saw some nice bucks. Some bucks I sure would have been proud to put my tag on. They were bigger than the one I killed, but nothing was going to top that experience for me. Like I didn't care. Like, yeah, that was my deer, and that's what happened. I was proud of it. But we're having trouble finding a whitetail. And there's this one area, Tim had taken me by it the first day before Mike got there. And I remember driving down this road, driving by this piece that we had permission on, and looking at it and being like, man, that looks like whitetail country. Like, if there were any whitetail out here, they would be in there. Of course, I'm chasing muley, so that was all I thought about it, and we kept going. We drive past that, I guess on Tuesday, and Mike sees it, and he's like, oh, that looks like whitetail ground. And no sooner had he thought that, well, I guess we drive past it. We actually pull in a little turn in to turn around and leave. And when we pulled into that turn in, we bump a buck. And so as we're driving, we see this buck, this huge whitetail buck, booking it across this field. And we're like, oh man, that is a toad. Like, this was a huge whitetail, man. I'm not joking. Monster. And so we're like, well, we know where we're going to focus our efforts because we now know where the whitetails are. So the next day, Wednesday that followed, there was a lot of Tim and I were still driving around, but the ultimate focus and where Mike and I ended up actually trying to go in and set up on a tree line that that area where that buck was. Like, Mike had been glassing this buck in the morning, trying to figure out, and he had eyes on, trying to figure out where he's bedding, where he's going from. We're trying to strategize and figure out how we can get in there and kill this deer.
Yeah.
So then we get to Thursday, the last day of archery and the day before rifle open. And Mike goes down there by himself. Tim and I are driving around looking for whitetails, but also scouting muleys for Tim, whose season opens the next day. So we're driving around, and Mike calls us. He's like, hey, he's in here. I just watched him bed down. It's like 7:30 in the morning. He's like, I just watched him bed down with a doe. I'm going to make a stalk on this deer. We're like, all right, we're gonna head that way. We'll be right around the corner. So we meet Mike. We come up with a plan. Mike goes in there, and that's where things really, like, Thursday was one of the most interesting and painful days that I've ever had hunting in my life. And this is why. The Mike goes in there. Tim and I are scrambling around trying to figure out where we can park to maybe have a vantage point. Long story short, we ended up not being able to park where we wanted because of a pheasant hunter that was hunting public land in this particular area. We didn't want to mess up him. And then we were trying to go the other way and ended up finding out that a road on Onyx is not a real road in this one particular area. So it took
bummer.
even farther out of our way. Well, while we're trying to get back around to Mike, Mike calls us. He's like, hey, you got to get this guy in this white truck out of here. And we're like, what are you talking about? Well, Mike had been this is a piece of private property we have permission on.
Uh-huh.
Mike had started his stalk. He was only 100 yards from this whitetail. It's bedded in this little patch of evergreens. Mm-hmm. And he starts hearing it. He's not far from the road, and he starts hearing a truck, like, slowly driving down the road. And at first, he didn't look. He's just thinking, man, that's kind of weird that Sam and Tim would be, like, driving by. Why are they doing that? So finally, he kind of turns around and looks, and there's this white flatbed pickup that is just slow rolling past. And the dude looks, and he sees Mike, and he slams on his brakes. Mike just keeps on going. Mike ignores him, keeps on going. And the dude gets out of his truck and he starts making all this racket, opening and closing his doors. Like he's trying to bump these deer.
Really?
And he does. So he bumps the deer. As Tim and I are coming down the road, Mike gets on the phone. He's like, of course, he had a much more colorful way of saying this, but this joker just bumped these deer out of here. Like, we got to move. He's ruining my. Tim and I, like, this was like a freaking movie, man. We come flying in the pickup, past this white truck, scoop up Mike, and we just take off because it's so flat and open. If you bump these deer, if you follow them, you can find them again.
Hmm.
So we take off and we turn and we're going up to this field and we actually pull into this field next to where that guy was pheasant hunting.
Yeah.
I'm a pheasant hunter. If he's by any chance listening to this podcast, I'm sorry, dude, because he had 3 whitetail bucks run out like 50 yards from him. This truck pull into a field, us, and then do a donut and leave. And then this white pickup haul butt down the road, also chase deer. I can only imagine what this pheasant hunter's thinking at this point. Like,
Right.
what is.
Right.
So we relocate these deer in this wheat field. They moved about a mile and they bedded in this wheat field. So we drop Mike off to try and make another stalk on these bedded deer. Tim and I park where we can see Mike and the deer. Well, then we look behind us, and about 600 yards behind us on the road, this white truck shows back up. And he's just sitting there watching. So he sits there for a while, and then he leaves. And at this point, Tim knows people in the area. He knows the authorities. He's calling the sheriff. He's calling the game warden like, hey, I don't know what this guy's doing, but he doesn't belong here. And he's messing with hunters who are legally hunting right now. White truck leaves. Well, next thing we know, white truck shows up on the next road over where he can also see these deer. And he just starts driving back and forth slowly, like trying to get these deer to stand up. Like he is jacking with us at this point. Tim and I make a loop. We actually get his license plate number. And it turns into this whole big deal, talking to the sheriff and everything about all this stuff. Mike puts a stalk on these whitetails while this white truck is doing all this. Mike gets about 120 yards from him, and the younger buck in the group spots him, and the deer bump. So Mike's come back to the truck. We're like, all right, we'll do this again. We're going to relocate the deer. They keep heading south. Well, white truck peels out and leaves after the deer again. And then the sheriff calls us, who we've been trying to get a hold of, and he's like, hey, I'm 2 minutes away. Stay where y'all are at. I'm going to come talk to y'all. We're like, crap, okay, whatever. So we hang out, wait for the sheriff. He shows up. We tell him everything that's going on. We all give him statements. Like he wants like official stuff on what's been going on. So he's like, we tell him which way the white pickup went. And he's like, all right, I'll follow. I'll go down that way. Y'all can keep hunting. I'm going to go down that way and just see if I see them. They're on the road. So we're like, all right, let's get back on these deer. So we take off. We're in 2 separate trucks at this point. Mike's in one, Tim and I in the other. And Mike is going down the road that this white truck went down. And Mike tops this hill, and the white pickup is sitting at the bottom of the hill. And he is 50 yards out into the field, walking back to his pickup with a deer decoy and a rifle during archery season.
Wow.
And sheriff's behind Mike. So Mike's like hanging out the window of his truck, like frantically waving for the sheriff to like hurry up. And we're all thinking, we're on the phone with Mike. We're all thinking, we got this guy. Like, he's done. So the sheriff shows up, talks to the guy for about 20 minutes. We're still hunting the deer, but we can see them off in the distance. And then they just leave and go their separate ways. So we get in contact with the sheriff because the white truck left and then came back again. Just kept playing this cat and mouse game with us the whole day. So we called the sheriff again. He's like, well, he told me he was going home. We're like, you believe that? Really? And the sheriff told us that this guy apparently had a bow in his truck, like sitting in the passenger seat, and claimed to be bow hunting. And we're like, Mike is telling him, he's like, dude, I literally watched this dude like run back to his truck when he saw you coming and throw a rifle in the back seat. Like he's hunting these deer with a rifle. And long story short, man, not to linger on this any longer, but we sat on these deer all day long. We never went back to the house. We never came off of these deer until dark, legal light, because this white truck was there the whole time, and he avoided us like the plague. Like we would make a corner to try and get a better vantage point on the deer, and if we were close to him, he would drive away, and then he would come back when we moved somewhere else. Like he was trying to avoid contact with us.
Wow.
But we were legit, like, and it was such a weird feeling because we were legitimately worried. Like if we leave, this dude is just going to bust out a rifle and shoot this buck, and that's it. It's over. We want to shoot this buck too, though, but we want to shoot the right way.
Yeah.
And of course, the deer ended up bedding down and spending the rest of the day after all this had happened on the one 320-acre field that we could not get permission on.
Whoa.
Like we got in contact with the landowner and everything, and they told us, "Hey, sorry, our family's coming out to hunt next weekend, so we're not letting anybody else hunt." We're like, "That's perfectly cool." Like, so we stayed on the property that next to it that we had permission on, and just glassed the whole time and kept eyes on the deer and made sure that the dude in the white truck knew that we were still in the area. And that's how we spent the rest of our day. And it did not feel like hunting, man. It was like this sickening feeling that we were having to deal with somebody like this who was just trying to, I don't know, shoot a deer for fun. I don't know what it
Poach.
was. Yeah, I mean, he's a poacher. That's what he is. But
Yeah.
I've never felt that way before. I wasn't even the hunter. I was just there. But I've never felt that way before because it was so strange. It was a very weird experience. But to cap the trip though, that was Thursday. That was the dumps. I had to leave to come home Friday after the morning hunt, which was unsuccessful, the opening morning a rifle. But that evening, of course, right after I left, Tim was able to punch his mule deer rifle tag on his biggest muley to date. So
Cool.
felt it was a fitting end to an epic week that the guy that invited us out, that busted his butt when he wasn't even able to hunt, he busted his butt for us for a whole week to do everything he could to get us on deer. I thought it was fitting that he ended the trip by shooting his best muley ever. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I always say you can't outgive good, and so here this guy is doing his part to make sure that you guys have a wonderful time, and he gets rewarded because of that. And it sounds apropos to how I view the world. I love it,
yeah.
Sam. So here you are. You filled your mule deer tag. You had quite an experience. A lot of stuff to talk about and share. Um, what are a takeaway from it that you get to now apply to your Texas style hunting that you're like, okay, I think I'm going to go about things maybe a little differently?
Man, I don't know. It's hard. I don't want to sound like I haven't taken away anything that is applicable back home, but like we talked about, like these deer are completely different.
Mm,
It the way they act, the way they behave, the way that they interact with each other, the way they live, it's like nothing I've ever experienced before. I was wrong so many times in, hey, let's try this, over the course of the week, and I was wrong every time just because while it may have worked in Texas, it doesn't work out there.
mm,
And so uh, I don't know. I think if I could take away anything for hunting in Texas, I think I would analyze it more down to just um, the patience it takes to be successful, the playing the long game in some situations, however applicable, and even just bringing it down to something as simple as my shot. Um, you know, actually execute. It was refreshing after what had happened earlier in the year to be able to execute a clean, quick kill on an animal with a bow, and even just being able to have all those steps, all those things fall into place again the right way without messing it up. It I can take something away from that and back to Texas for sure.
I love it. I love it. How can all the listeners who have tuned into this follow along on all of your other adventures?
So as I mentioned in my last podcast on our show, we got a lot going for us. But I'll hit as quick as I can here. We're a hunting and outdoor media production company. We produce online media series, podcast, all that good stuff. So we have 4 different shows, including our podcast on Carbon TV, Fall Obsession Podcast. Please go listen to that. We post weekly new episodes on that. Texas Dirt is my show down here in Texas for whitetail hunting down here in the South. Midwest Mindset is a similar series as far as habitat management goes for whitetails in the Midwest. That's on Carbon TV. And then Couch Chats is like our staff-inspired podcast. It's a video podcast that's on Carbon TV as well. So there's a few episodes of that on there folks can check out. fallobsession.com is our website. That's where everybody can, go to see everything come together, if you will, in its respective form. We also got the normal swag and apparel and stuff. We got a holiday sale going on if folks want to get in on that before it ends with the start of the new year. But go check that out. And then all the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, X, Go Wild, all that stuff. We're very active, post daily on those. So that's it. It's a journey, man. And we love producing high quality outdoor content that's applicable to blue collar hunters. And that's our mission, is to put stuff out there that you guys can relate to. And that revolves right back to this experience. As I already mentioned, like I'm a blue collar guy. I'm a fireman from Texas, man. I'm a fireman from Texas, and I got to do it like this. So if I can do it, anybody can do it, man. Just freaking go out there and get it done.
I love it, man. Yeah, it's inspiring to hear you speak, Samuel. Very proud of you, brother. This episode is going to actually go out here probably maybe Christmas Day. I'm not sure if I want to release a podcast on Christmas morning or if I want to bump it back to the day after Christmas. So,
And it always sucks because like our show, we release on Mondays like you. Like that's when we publish. And there's always some holidays. I think Christmas has happened before on a Monday, or like Memorial Day or stuff like that. And it's like, normally I just, even though I'm a person of habit, like I have a routine, like Monday is the day podcasts go out. I normally bump them as well, just so folks don't have to worry about, obviously I want folks to worry about listening to my podcast, right? So I'd rather them not have to think about that on Christmas too.
right. I love it. I love it. All right. Well, brother, thank you so much for joining for the Instagram Live. All you guys who tuned in and hopped on socials, really appreciate it. I want to say thank you. If you guys are interested in learning more about hunting and learning more about how to get involved, reach out to myself at soulseekersnation.com or on social media. I'm sure, man, I got an evening cough going on. I'm sure Sam over at Fall Obsession would love to chat with you as well. But remember that hunting has the power to transform lives through primal adventure, and you can never outgive good, as mentorship is conservation. If you want hunting to last for generations to come, you got to invest in the hearts and lives of other people. For Johnny Mack and Sam Thrash of Fall Obsession, be blessed, freedom on, Merry Christmas, and stay soulful, everybody. If you enjoyed today's podcast and want to support the show, you can always like, share, subscribe, and leave a rating, as it helps us share our mission of mentorship is conservation. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of Soul Seekers Nation as we transform lives through primal adventure. If you want to get more connected with the podcast, check out the Soul Seekers Nation Facebook group, as I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. So stay tuned and stay soulful.